Awesome. So welcome everybody. We've got a very special webinar today. So we'll be talking about the Baseline Introduction Opportunity Assessment Program, as well as NRCan's Mike Layer is here to talk about the Emission Reduction Fund. So we're very excited about this, and hopefully you guys have lots of questions. We will have some time for questions at the very end. So before I do start, we do have a couple of handouts sort of on your panel screen. One is the BROA program guide, and as well as the ERF applicant guide. So those are available to you if you haven't had a chance to look at either of those documents beforehand. So just for the agenda for today, so I'll start by giving a bit of a program overview. I'm actually going to turn off my webcam right now, so that's not awkward. So I'll give a program overview of the BROA assessment program. Lee will then talk about the submission requirements, so that being the reporting and the data collection side of things. And then Michael will hand it over to Michael to discuss the Emission Reduction Fund. And then we'll open it up for questions. If you do have any questions during or after at any point, please do put them into the question box or in the chat box in your panel. And we will get to those as best we can. If we do not get a chance to answer your question here today, feel free to reach out to us. Our contact is on the screen right now. Or we will reach out to you as well if we don't get a chance to answer your question in here. So if you do, send it in. Yeah, with that, I will get started. So what is the BROA assessment program? For those of you who aren't aware, I think many of you already are and have already started participating, which is obviously very exciting for us. So the BROA assessment program was launched on December 1st of 2020, so it's still a pretty new program, and it's to provide funding for small and medium producers to identify emission sources and provide recommended solutions. So Carbon Connect International administers and manages this program. It is supported by the Methane Emissions Leadership Alliance and funded by the Government of Alberta. So the program objectives are kind of four main pieces here. So the first and foremost is to create jobs. I think everyone here is pretty well aware that the oil and gas industry in Alberta and just the industry in Alberta has been suffering pretty hard. So this is just one of the initiatives the government is taking to help create more jobs for people and get people back to work. So the program will help identify emission reduction opportunities. So that is a huge goal for this program, as well as raising awareness about energy use and the associated economic and environmental impacts, and support operators to move forward with projects by recommending projects for provincial and federal funding programs, as well as carbon offsets. So this is kind of how the ERF fits in. This is sort of one of the inputs for that program, and Michael will sort of help us understand that a little bit better later on. So for eligibility, so bits of eligibility here really. So on the operator facility side, the operators and facilities need to be within Alberta's conventional oil and gas sector and meet these two main criteria. So produce fewer than 60,000 barrels of oil equivalent per day in Alberta. And so this is based on data that's reported into Petronex for 2019. As well, facilities need to be located in Alberta and subject to Section 8 requirements under the AER's Directive 60. So service providers being sort of the main people who will be actually collecting this data and the reporting also have some eligibility criteria. The full list of requirements are listed on our website, but basically service providers do need to be pre-qualified. So submit all of the documentation that we've requested. We will go through that. And then once you're pre-qualified, you'll be added to a list of qualified service providers with all the contact information, which is posted on our CCI portal. So the bulk of the program focuses on three types of assessments. So the first is the device and equipment inventory. And this is the identification of all equipment at a given facility. which includes things like the device manufacturer, model, serial number, detailed specification of the equipment, associated photos and of equipment and nameplates, GPS coordinates, and any more specific sort of details about each piece of equipment. I do want to emphasize that it is all, so this is more extensive than previous programs have been. We have included all emitting equipment as well as combustion equipment and kind of everything in between. So just so that you're aware that all equipment does need to be collected here. And then in the reporting side, which Lee will talk about a little bit more, there's quantification of the vent rates and emission volumes as well required. The leak detection survey is only eligible for funding if it's being completed with a device and equipment inventory. So that's the kind of the key piece here. And what will be collected is you'll be identifying and quantifying all the fugitive emissions for this one. And lastly, the extended flow and gas composition analysis. So this provides baseline volume and flow rates, as well as detailed chemical speciation analysis of a vent source. The specifics of the service type aren't really outlined super detailed in our program guide because it is really based on operators' project development needs, and is also kind of a big piece to flow into the ERF application. So that's kind of the purpose of this, or one of the main purposes of this type of survey is to really support that ERF application. Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say about those. So incentive details. So this is the most important part, I think, for most people. So incentives are pre-approved up to 80% of the total eligible project cost based on the service provider quote. The incentive will be adjusted to the final invoice amount at the end. So the quote should be done fairly accurately, but we understand things change when you get to site. The facilities are different than expected, and time may take a different amount of time to complete the to actually do the inventories, etc. So we will adjust it to the final invoice amount. Incentive payments will only be made to service providers, and there's a maximum incentive amount of $200,000 per operator. So there is no minimum incentive amount, nor a min or max number of facilities per application. So you can submit, hundreds of facilities in one application, or you can break it up to regions or however you would like, as long as you're within that maximum incentive amount. And then funding is approved on a first come, first served basis. So how does the program work? So the first step is just selecting what type of survey you want to do. So if it's just inventory, you want to add leak detection to that, or if you're more focused on the sort of flow and gas composition piece. So then you start an application through our portal. Once you've submitted all of the required documents, our team will review that application for eligibility. And if it meets all of our requirements, then the incentive will be pre-approved based on the quote. And the terms and conditions will be signed by both the operator and the service provider. At that point, the service provider will visit each facility on the application and complete the assessments. And then there's kind of two key milestones for submission, which is both done through the CCI portal, and they also are associated with payment amounts. So the first is the data submission, which needs to follow the formats listed in our program guide, and specifically for the inventory as outlined in the data input library. Once all of that is submitted to us, we will review it, make sure there's no errors in the data or any missing data, and then 50% of that incentive will be paid out. There's also some time at this point then for the report to be completed. And then the final invoice also needs to be submitted. At that point, we'll review your the inputs, and the incentive will be adjusted to that final invoice amount, and the remainder of the incentive will be paid. So there is one more step in the process here, which is once the operator provides proof of payment approval for the remainder of that service provider invoice. So the program does 80%, so the operator is responsible for the remaining 20%. So once they show us that there's approval for that payment, then our team will release the final report and raw data to the operator. And the last thing I wanted to kind of bring up is just call out some of the project costs that are eligible versus what is ineligible, just to highlight. The full list is in our program guide, which is shown here. But so staff hours and travel costs are eligible, but travel from outside of Alberta, it needs to be excluded from that. Equipment rentals are all eligible. However, the purchase of equipment is not eligible. So things such as laboratory costs and third-party subcontractors are eligible, but taxes of any form are not eligible. So I do just want to point out that we do allow variance to the service provider quote of about 10%. If it does go beyond that 10%, again, we understand that measurement schematics and plot plans aren't always available or aren't always accurate. We do recommend you use those when you create the quote. Just if it's more than that 10%, you'll just require approval from our team. It's not that we won't allow it. So just wanted to point that part out. And with that, I will transfer the screen share to Lise to talk about the reports and data collection.
Okay, thanks, Aggie. So let's see if we can show the screen. Let me see once you can see it.
Yep.
Great. So thanks again, Aggie. Yeah, so let's look at the deliverables for the 3 assessment types, right? So as you saw in the flow charts, there are 2 milestones, the data submission and a final report. So because the leak detection assessment can only be completed in conjunction with an equipment inventory, we'll address those 2 types.
Lee, if you're talking, I don't know if you disappeared.
Hi, sorry. Am my screen still showing?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So do I have to go backwards here? No, so I think, well, anyways, I said we're going to start and talk about the extended flow and gas composition analysis and what data needs to be submitted for that. So you need to submit the measurements collected with all applicable data with each measurement listed separately, and then also submit the lab analysis from an accredited lab for each gas sample, and the analytical reports must be date verifiable. Your submission must also include a catalog of each facility and each sample location. The catalog should contain the file names that you used in each of the uploads. So the BROA Documents and Templates tab on the CCI portal contains a template for this catalog file. Now, in terms of the project completion submission requirements for this assessment type, the full details are listed in section 8.2 of the program guide, but include a summary of the data sampling and measurement methodology used, the quantification of the baseline volumes and flow rates and the methods used, time periods and applicable technical justification for the time periods used to establish variability of volumes and flow rates, emission factors used and the associated uncertainties, and date verifiable analytical reports from an accredited lab, again, for each sample from each source. Now, in this case, we're not providing a template for this submission because the information will likely vary significantly depending on the specific project needs. Now, moving on to the device, equipment inventory, and leak detection assessments, if one is being done with the inventory. We created a file that we're calling the data input library, which defines all the requirements for these assessment types and is available for download from the CCI portal. So please review it carefully and reach out to us if anything is unclear, because that's really the basis of this assessment type. And we'll look at some of the requirements here. So in terms of files and file types, there will actually be only one submission per project. It's going to be a zip file that should contain all the other files for that particular project, like the 2 project master files, which are CSV files that contain all of the required facility and sources data, and the various project attachments like the facility and sources photos, the gas analysis, etc. Now, we'll be receiving information and files from a number of different providers, so it's extremely important that everyone follows the naming conventions that are outlined in the data input library. You see some examples here. So there are examples in the library, and I just for sake of time here, I'm not going to go through in detail here, but please get in touch with us if you'd like to discuss any of these, if any of the elements aren't clear. And the library file also includes a list of all the fields that may apply to the facility and to each equipment and source, including things like all the field names, description, including notes, instructions, cautions. So that description field includes a lot of information. It also describes the acceptable values for each field, whether the field is required and which unit should be used where applicable. And then it also provides an example of the data that applies to each field. Some important considerations to keep in mind when looking at the data input library. Like on the sources side, there are fields that are common to all sources, and then there are separate sections for source-specific fields. The library may need to be updated from time to time, and if that happens, we will post a revised version to the portal with a date. So always make sure that you're referencing the most recent version before you submit your data. Now, you're also being asked to provide lat and long coordinates for the facility, for each source or equipment, and for the release points. So most equipment and release points should be accessible, and we hope to get readings within a meter of the equipment and the release point. But keep in mind that safety should always come first. So in the case of tanks, for example, nobody should ever be on a ladder or a roof of a tank just to get a GPS coordinate. So we suggest you get as close to the tank as possible without getting inside a berm or a dike. If there were 4 tanks inside one berm, for example, getting the coordinates at the 4 corners of the berm would suffice. Now, this assessment type includes an inventory of all equipment on site, emphasis on all again, like Aggie mentioned, and including those that do not have methane emissions. So when we talk about required fields, you note that there's some of them are only required if the equipment or source vents or is leaking natural gas. For equipment that is driven by air, electricity, only the inventory fields would be required. And regarding photos, in the CSV file, you'll only be indicating the number of photos that you're providing, like photos for the facility and then photos for the sources within the source files. So then make sure that the actual photos are named accurately as per the naming convention we were talking about, and then are included in the final project data package, which is going to be that zip file. So now the question of how to go about collecting the data. So some service providers who have developed or have access to software can obviously use their own systems to collect the data. CCI has also developed a simple app that can be used instead, or service providers could combine both approaches. So for example, if their software does not include some of the required sources, they could use the BROA app to collect data for those sources, then export the data and combine it with their own output. Ultimately, the output that will be submitted must match the data input library and the sample CSV files, regardless of how the data or how that is achieved or how the data gets in. So for those who decide to use the BROA app, it is a progressive web app that can be used in a number of devices. After you install, so you need to install it as an app on your device, it will run without the need of internet or the use of cell data. Now, all project, facility, and source data will be stored locally in the user's device. Because some fields will be completed during a field visit and others will likely be done as part of a desktop exercise, the app allows partially completed records to be saved. So you need to ensure that you have completed all the required fields before submitting the project files. And we also recommend that you disable any automatic clearing of cache data and that you download the data frequently to prevent data loss in the event of a device malfunction. CCI has no way to access data that's stored in users' devices, so always either email the files to yourself, save them to the cloud. You know, it's always a kind of good practice to have. The portal has a section with the link to the app to download the app, along with a short help document. And I guess I'm just gonna following just a few screenshots here. This is the landing page from where you can add a project or view the project list. The project screen contains a list of all the projects that have been created. From this screen, you can create a new project or click the arrow to the right to go to that project's facilities screen. And if the facilities screen, you will see a list of all the facilities that were created within a project. From here, you can add a new facility to this project, download the particular project facility in source data, which is already in the required CSV output format, or click an existing facility ID to add the facility information. Clicking the arrow to the right of a facility identifier will take you to the facility sources screen. So again, similarly in the sources screen, you will see a list of all the sources for the facility. From here, you can add a new source or click an existing source identifier to edit or complete the source information. As mentioned earlier, some fields are common to all sources, but others will appear at the bottom of the form depending on the equipment or source category you selected. In terms of project completion submission requirements for these assessment types, so to provide operators with the information they need from the data collected, a final report must be completed and submitted for review. The BROA inventory report template is available through the CCI portal, and it includes all the requirements. It would be things like summaries, quantification of emissions, recommendations, project abatement costs. Just a note here that we actually will soon be posting a support document to provide guidance on the estimation of abatement costs, kind of what we're expecting, which is just more of a generalized, not an exact cost, but there'll be guidance on that. And then the template also has a section for provincial and federal funding programs that would be available for the recommended projects. So this concludes our overview of the BROA assessment program and its deliverables, but all details are available on the program's website and the program guide. Now, on that last note there about funding programs, again, we're pleased that Michael Lair from Natural Resources Canada was able to join us today, and he'll spend the next few minutes maybe talking a little bit about the Emission Reduction Fund onshore program, and then after that, all three of us will be available to answer questions. So now let me just see if I can hand that over to Michael. There we go. Stop share my screen. There we go. I think we can see your screen now.
Can you see that now, Lee?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so and I'll just verify again. You can see this now.
Yeah, we're seeing your notes screen.
Okay, I'll get rid of that.
I think you might be able to just stop sharing and right click, and you can choose a different screen to share.
Okay, so
You may need to stop sharing your screen.
You might be able to go to display settings at the top as well and just switch them.
okay, display settings. Okay.
There you go. Swap. There we go.
That's perfect.
You can see that now?
Not yet. Did you click?
There we go.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. Okay, so thanks very much, Aggie and Lee, for that great foundation. As you guys were presenting, I think the synergies between your BROA objectives and the program opportunities are really complementary to what the ERF is seeking to pull forward and create opportunities for our sector through. So, okay, how do I advance now? There we go. Okay, so as Aggie initially said, one of the priority objectives for the BROA program is jobs, and that's complementary to some of the core objectives to the ERF program. I'll just give you a little bit of history background. I think we're all aware that the ERF program genesis is COVID as well as price war related and the financial impacts on the industry. And so one of the major outcome objectives for the program was to see if we could engage in activities and pull forward activities that create economic opportunities for the sector. And that's why you see here that identifying opportunities to increase hydrocarbon recovery and conservation is actually first and foremost. And we also wanted to have an environmental co-benefit or impact coming out of this. And so the pathway that the ERF was designed around in order to achieve the combination of economic benefits as well as environmental benefits is to focus on lowering or eliminating routine intentional venting to the atmosphere or into flare systems. And so that I guess at this point we're kind of drilling into maybe a subsector of what the BROA eligibilities are, i.e. fugitive emissions or LDAR campaigns. So we're focusing in on lowering or eliminating routine venting into the atmosphere or directly into flare systems. And the objective of our BOA requirements, which I think the BROA is very compatible with in many cases, is to inform developing a competitive business case that not only your companies will invest in, but that we will invest in as well. The design of the ERF is such that it will contribute a maximum of 75% of the overall capital project value, which means that operators, and perhaps in concert with the with provinces and provincial funding, have to have some skin in the game. So we want to pull forward projects that even in these cash constrained times and uncertain times, a CEO or company leadership will go, yes, I will invest in that. So I think that's very compatible with the objectives that that Aggie pointed out early in her deck. And then so I think the major point of alignment with the BROA and the ERF requirements is in the extended flow and gas composition analysis space. And what we're looking for, and what I think that component of the BROA provides the potential to deliver, is the accurate time series understanding of the variable fluid phases, the pressures, flows, and the chemistries. Those are core and fundamental to being able to design gas conservation and hydrocarbon recovery projects. Even though we have an environmental outcome objective, the primary driver for this is to approach it from a hydrocarbon recovery and conservation standpoint, i.e. facility engineers, production engineers. Let's maximize our recovery and let's reduce or eliminate the slippage of our products into the environment, and the outcome of that approach is we reduce emissions. And we need this kind of information in order to develop the accurate design and the sizing of the custom-built solutions for those facilities or for those sources that we're focusing on. And it's vital and key to informing the ERF requirement for a class 3 or better cost estimate. We can't, we will not entertain class 5 or class 4 type estimates, and it's impossible to develop a class 3 or better estimate without having this level of detail and rigor in the BOA. And I think it was interesting to me, encouraging to me, that the BOA and BROA have some really good alignment that creates opportunity for BROA developers to carry those BROA products forward, not only as information products, but also as eligible cost items into the ERF space. So a BOA under the ERF is a prerequisite requirement in order to even apply and develop the necessary cost, class 3 cost estimate. But 100% of the BOA expenses qualify as in-kind contributions towards the matching component that the proponent has to bring forward. So anything that an applicant would avail themselves of under the BROA, those costs can actually be carried forward as eligible into the ERF and can be an in-kind contribution towards the matching resources that that an applicant has to bring forward. So I think there's a benefit there. It'll make provincial money, I think, quite impactful in driving down the down payment or the in-kind contribution that an applicant has to make in these cash-constrained times. And then I'm just going to move real quick to this flow diagram. I think many of you have probably seen it. It's in the applicant's guide that is appended to this webinar right at the moment. Aggie made reference to it earlier on. I just want to give you a little bit of an idea of the types of projects that have come forward via the first intake period. So as you may have seen from the web information that was sent out in the last week or so, there's north of 3 megatons of reductions that are going to be coming out of the first intake period from quite a small population of projects. 93% of that 3.3 megatons, i.e. about 3.1 megatons, is actually from gas conservation projects. And that is conserving high and low pressure flash gas or solution gas at oil production facilities, and building kilometers and kilometers of gathering system and compression and connecting that previously stranded gas or soon to be unstranded gas into gas processing. So it's really exciting to see those projects come forward. And then we do also have a small population of lowering projects that are typically characterized by high to low bleed conversions, as well as some sending some gas for destruction in incinerators. It's also quite interesting. We've got quite a few projects who already spent some capital putting in incinerators, both high and low pressure incinerators, and they're now converting those into complete gas conservation projects by using the ERF to build kilometers of gathering system and associated compression. And we also have projects that have undertaken high to low bleed conversions, and now they're going to deploy technologies such as slipstream to conserve that low bleed volume and feed it into their fuel header. So quite exciting to see that some project opportunities are coming forward into the ERF that have already capitalized upon the I think the very strategic provincial programming that has created some early action that's taken place already, and the ERF is building upon that foundation stone that was laid with provincial resources and planning. And with that, I will stop and turn it back to Aggie and Lee, and we'll be available for questions. Is there anything I have to do, Aggie or Lee, to give the screen back to you, or can you take it?
I believe we can take it. Lee, maybe we can leave it on the thank you slide that you have, so I'll give it to you.
Sure.
Should have it now. But yeah, so we're open for questions now. I'll actually even turn on my my screen so you can see my face.
No.
Please do share your questions in the questions box here, if you do have any. And again, thank you, Michael, for that information. That was really, really great.
My pleasure. I think it's great to be able to collaborate with something that actually meshes well by design. So this is quite an easy discussion and opportunity space to occupy.
Awesome.
So we have a question for you here, Michael. What is the deadline to submit ERF applications?
So my understanding, and I think Amin, my colleague, is on the line here. He can verify for me. The second intake period opened just day before yesterday on Monday, and I believe it's going to be open into the third week of March. I don't know exactly what that date is. Amin, can you verify what the date is?
Yeah, that's correct, Mike. So we opened up on January 18th, and the program will be open to applications, the second intake, until March 19th. So midnight of March 19th, Eastern Standard Time.
There's another question about, and I guess we've answered that online, but just in case somebody else is wondering, there was a question on whether the presentation and the slides would be available for attendees. And yes, we will forward a copy of the presentation to everyone who's attending.
And Lee, if it's okay with you, I will send you a PDF version of my few slides here, and if you don't mind handing those out as well.
We'll make it a package for sure. Thanks, Mike.
We've got a question here for Michael as well. Did you mention whether the time spent on development of Class 3 level estimate is covered by the funding?
So the costs of developing the Class 3 estimate, is that the question?
Yes.
Yeah, that's all part of an eligible project cost. So the cost of developing the BOA, or in this case, the BROA, are eligible costs. And given the fact that that has to be developed in advance of an application, that would, of course, be an in-kind contribution, as well as developing the application. Those costs would be an in-kind contribution that is accrued in advance of your application, because you wouldn't be developing a Class 3 estimate after the application's been submitted.
And Mike, if I can just add in, any cost that has incurred prior to the signing of a contribution agreement with NRCan, NRCan would reimburse up to 30% of those costs. If you're claiming those costs for reimbursement prior to agreement, we have a 30% rule. So for this intake period, the reimbursement period would be from April 1st of 2021 to March 31st of 2022. But incurred costs that is part of the total project cost can be dated back to April 17th of last calendar year. And the project could also continue, and the proponent can carry on costs on proponents' aside 1 year after NRCan's contribution is completed.
Yeah, and if I could just build on what Amin just shared. So if you wanted to be reimbursed for the Class 3, the cost of developing the Class 3 estimate, as Amin shared, you'd only be able to get reimbursed, quote unquote, for 30% of it, whereas 100% of it could be carried forward into your in-kind. So I think it could often be in your interest, actually, to have those previously incurred costs be looped into the in-kind component of your matching fund scheme, as opposed to simply seeking to get 30% of it back as reimbursement. You might be imposing an opportunity cost on yourselves.
Okay. So there's one more question here. It might be Michael or Amin. So it says this question is for Mike. For the extended gas flow that is required, does a typical extended gas analysis done by a lab like AGA Core Labs count? These analyses have the various components broken down by mole fraction and have the density and higher heating value?
That's exactly it. And this is the text in our applicant's guide is analogous, Lee, to what you presented. You know, the date verified PDF copy of the lab report that gives the mole fractions. Exactly, our typical extended gas analyses that we undertake. And as current as possible, please, you know, don't dip into a 3 or 4 year old well test and carry that forward. All of the successful applicants in intake period 1 had gas analyses that were no older than about 60 to 90 days.
All right. We've got another question here on, would the 20% cost of a BROA project be eligible for funding as part of a BOA under ERF?
So whatever the value of the BROA transaction that was described by Aggie and by Lee is, that final invoice is something that you could carry forward from an expense standpoint into the in-kind or matching component of the ERF, and then as well the data contained within the BROA, especially in regard to deliverables such as the extended gas analyses and the various requirements such as the, what types of measurement and instrumentation and accuracies were utilized for measuring, what types of predictive models were utilized if you were doing simulations, or what emission factors were you using and the associated inaccuracies. All of that stuff would be carried forward as being compliant with the information requests necessary to evaluate the project proposal.
Thank you. I think the next one would be for Lee here, so I'll let you pose the question.
Yeah, so the question was, please confirm, does non-methane venting, it's a good question. So non-methane venting devices that are operating on clean instrument air or electric need to be inventoried. And for BROA, the answer is yes. So basically the intent of BROA is to give operators a full inventory of all their devices. There are different reasons for a lot of operators don't have a good sense of what's out there, even though they've done projects over time. The other thing, like combustion equipment, for example, is not venting. It would be like there's no Directive 60 requirement, but some of that information is needed for other things that the operators need to supply and other programs and other information that they need to report, whether it's to Petronex, estimation of fuel consumption of small Catadyne heaters and things like that, that they have to include as part of their fuel flare vent reporting to Petronex every month. So we heard over and over from service providers at the beginning of this that one of the main costs of doing inventory is the travel. So the government of Alberta made the decision to, if it's supposed to help operators, then let's inventory everything, which is why we're also allowing, including one fugitive survey, like one outdoor survey in the inventories, even though this is a requirement that the companies have to do anyways, but the government is covering the cost of one, because you're out at the site, we might as well do everything we can do at that one site. So collect all the data, do a fugitive assessment if it's one is needed at that point, and the government is covering the cost through BROA. So so that we don't have to, in 6 months, the operator could come back and say, oh, no, I don't have all my combustion equipment, or I don't have all my other pneumatics, I don't have a good inventory. So there are reasons also where things might need to be changed later on, depending on other requirements from regulatory. So yes, everything that is at a site should be inventoried. That was the long answer to the question. But
I think that answered it. But just to go specifically into the instrument air and electric inventories, these won't need any of the obviously vented emission collected data. It's really just an inventory for those.
So that's what my point in my talk there about. There's obviously inventory about what it is, what the serial number, things like that, the count. But then there's a whole host of fields about estimating emissions, which obviously will not apply to any of these. Does the app account or have a means of documenting devices that are already low bleed due to previous retrofit work? No, again, it's just a matter of if it's already, you're just going to be capturing through, whether it's the app or any other means, you're just going to be collecting an inventory of what it is. There's no preloaded data into the app, if that's what you were asking. Yeah, so basically you're just gonna, if it's a matter of documenting an inventory, if it is a low bleed, then it still has some, it's just capturing the make, model, and all the other fields that are listed in the data input library.
Does that answer your question? I think we may be misunderstanding it.
If there's more clarification on some details, so maybe we can have a discussion offline if you need to. But again, I guess the short answer is yes, all of the information would be.
Is there funding available? Yes, there still is funding available, so please do apply.
Yeah. So yeah, the question was, is there still funding available for the program? Yes, there is. So please put your, but we had, it was very interesting. I mean, we had immediate uptake into the program. It's been really great to see the interest.
Yeah, lots of people are out doing the surveys now, and some people are just evaluating applications at this point. So there is still funding available. So yeah.
Yes.
We're hoping to be able to support the ERF now that it's the application is open, the call is open.
The next intake is open, so. That was the last question on queue. Does anybody else have any questions? We still have a few minutes here for our allotted time, so like if any other questions for Michael, for Min, for the ERF, take advantage of the fact that we have them here today. I think your presentation was so,
Thorough.
thorough, yeah, and because everybody is pretty clear with what they need to do.
So we got another question here. Is the BROA app mandatory or third-party app fine for data collection? So
again,
yes.
Yeah. Do you want to take that?
No, you can take it. I'll let you take it.
No, sorry, it was app, so I was jumping on it. Yeah, so no, the app is not mandatory at all. I mentioned in the presentation, you could use the app, you could use your own software, you could use an Excel spreadsheet, you could use paper. How you collect the data is really not an issue for us one way or the other, as long as the data, as long as you collect all the fields that are required in the as per data input library, and the information is submitted in those CSV files. And again, the sample CSV files are available at the portal, as long as you're following the requirements of what, the format and decimal places, units, whatever is the requirement for the specific fields, you can collect the data any way you want. The benefit, if anybody wants to use the BROA app, is just that the export is already in the correct format, basically to meet the requirements. But no, you do not have to use that.
Yeah, and you can combine different systems if that works for you as well, if you've got a system that you prefer. So collect all the fields that you can collect through that software, and if there's any missing, you can use the BROA app to kind of support anything that might be missing.
Yeah, we've seen sources. For example, somebody might have a system that does really thorough pneumatic inventory, for example, but they don't have their system doesn't cover the combustion equipment, for example. So they could use the BROA app to collect the combustion equipment and then use their own system to do the pneumatic devices. Just as I said, just look through the input library for the specific fields we're asking for, because you might need to maybe supplement your however way you normally do it, just to include those fields that we are requesting as well.
So we've got another question for Michael. Do you anticipate a third intake for the ERF?
Good question. Our current understanding is that for the second intake period, the one that's currently open, all of the remaining funds are available, and a third intake is likely only to be coming up if and only if there are some leftover funds after the second intake period. It was only for the first intake period that we put a limit on the funds, simply because we wanted to have a good amount available for intake 2. Amin, do you want to clarify anything or add anything to what I said?
No, that was perfect.
We've got another. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'll wait. That's fine.
I just had another question, so if you have more on that one, we'll let you finish that one first.
No, I was just going to add to say that we're also here to support you in the application process. So if you have questions, the website emissions plural reduction fund.ca, that should take you forward you to the program's website, and there is an email there. So if you have project specific questions, please feel free to email us through the email on the website, and we have a fairly quick turnaround time, and we're here to support you. So we're looking forward to your questions and applications by March 19th.
Yes, so we have another question for you guys of when will the first round of participants be notified of the outcome?
I'll take that one. That's a great question. We are just about to finalize we have a few more applications we are going through from the first round, and we should finalize those this week and make a decision in a very short period thereafter. And those that have been approved already, and there is quite a few of them, I'm hoping to send the letters of approval in the coming days. So soon, in a very near future, all the projects that have gone through the first intake period, they should get their letters of approval or rejection.
So it's
government being government, we're just putting the final touches on things.
That's exciting. I'm sure they're all sitting at the edge of their seats. So also for Michael, it says, are you able to share the proportion of applications from intake 1 from BC operators?
At this time, I'm not able to divulge that level of detail because, and I'm not trying to skirt the question, but I believe there is a detailed press release that is anticipated in the coming days. And so I need to stand down and allow that to be the communications pathway. So sorry.
And then also to add to that, but federal government rules require us to do proactive disclosure. So when we do sign the contribution agreements, we will have that information on Open Canada website. And so you will be able to get information on which proponents made it through and a general description of the projects as well.
Great, we'll look for that. We've got 3 minutes left if there's any final questions. Otherwise, do feel free to reach out to us or to the ERF team directly. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you all for the opportunity, and we look forward to the possibility of really fruitful collaboration going forward. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for attending. Again, hopefully it was useful. So we'll see you soon again.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, folks. Bye now.